Updated the 31st of March 2018, 9:50 Australian Eastern Daylight Time. At least 16 Palestinians were killed and hundreds injured by Israeli security forces confronting one of the largest Palestinian demonstrations along the Israel-Gaza border in recent years, Gaza medical officials have said. Tens of thousands of Gazans, including families with children, gather along the border as clashes unfold. Israeli troops fire live bullets and tear gas at Palestinians on the other side of the fence. Protesters are demanding that Palestinian refugees be allowed the right of return to towns and villages from which their families fled in 1948. Tens of thousands of Palestinians, pressing for a right of return for refugees to what is now Israel, gathered at 5 locations along the fence, 65 kilometers frontier, where tents were erected for a planned 6-week protest, local officials said. The Israeli military estimate was 30,000. Families brought their children to the encampments just a few hundred meters from the Israeli security barrier with the Hamas Islamist-run enclave, and football fields were marked in the sand and scout bands played. But as the day wore on, hundreds of Palestinian youths ignored calls from the organizers and the Israeli military to stay away from the frontier, where Israeli soldiers across the border kept watch from dirt-mound embankments. The military said its troops had used riot dispersal means and firing towards main instigators. Some of the demonstrators were rolling burning tires and hurling stones at the border fence and its soldiers. 2 Palestinians were killed by tank fire, the Gaza Health Ministry said. The Israeli military said the 2 were militants who had opened fire at troops across the border. Palestinian health officials said Israeli forces used mostly gunfire against the protesters, in addition to tear gas and rubber bullets. Witnesses said the military had deployed a drone over at least one location to drop tear gas. Live fire was used only against people trying to sabotage the border security fence, and at least 2 of the dead were Hamas operatives, an Israeli military official said. Gaza health officials said one of the dead was aged 16 and at least 400 people were wounded by live gunfire, while others were struck by rubber bullets or treated for tear gas inhalation. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said in a statement that Israel was responsible for the violence and declared Saturday a national day of mourning. The United Nations Security Council was due to meet later on Friday to discuss the situation in Gaza, diplomats said. Protesters call for right of return. Protest marks Land Day, an annual Palestinian commemoration of the deaths of 6 Arab citizens of Israel killed by Israeli security forces during demonstrations over government land confiscations in northern Israel in 1976. The demonstrators are demanding that Palestinian refugees be allowed the right of return to towns and villages which their families fled from, or were driven out of, when the State of Israel was created in 1948. Israeli police announced heightened security measures nationwide from before the start of Passover on Friday at sundown and through the Jewish and Christian holidays, including the Eastern Orthodox celebrations of Easter next weekend. An Israeli police spokesman said thousands of officers would be deployed, including special patrol units, in all cities. West Bank crossing points leading to Israel were unusually quiet on Friday morning, local time, with a ban on many West Bank Palestinians entering through checkpoints. In Gaza, the tent protest was dubbed the March of Return. Some of the tents bore the names of the refugees' original villages. 80-year-old Mansi Nasser walked towards the border with the aid of his cane, ignoring calls to remain 700 meters from the barrier. "I was born in Beit Daras inside Palestine and I will accept no less than returning to it," he said, referring to his former home village just south of the modern Israeli city of Ashdod. The village no longer exists. Israel rules out any right of return, fearing an influx of Arabs that would wipe out its Jewish majority. Israel argues that refugees should resettle in a future state the Palestinians seek in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and Gaza. The protest is scheduled to culminate on May 15, the day Palestinians mark what they call the Nakba, or catastrophe, when the Israeli state was created. The protest organizers include Hamas, the armed Islamist movement that dominates Gaza, and representatives of other Palestinian factions. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh spoke at one tent encampment on Friday, saying that Gazans were demanding a return to Palestine, all of Palestine. No concessions and no recognition of the Zionist entity, Israel, in any inch of the land, with feelings raw on both sides. However, Hamas urged protesters to adhere to the peaceful nature of the march. An Israeli Foreign Ministry statement said the protest was being orchestrated in Gaza by Hamas in a deliberate attempt to provoke a violent confrontation. Reuters, AP.